Welcome, everyone. Okay, let's dive into this explainer. It's really designed to be your foundational guide to authentic, rigorous scholarship as you join our new postgraduate cohort. As an experienced research professor, I can promise you this. The absolute most vital tool you'll develop during your time here isn't some fancy reading technique or a new piece of software. It's your own self-awareness. Today, we're going to explore exactly how your personal lens shapes literally every piece of knowledge you produce. So let me just pose this question directly to all of you right out of the gate. Can a researcher ever truly be a completely neutral, objective observer? I mean, it's a super tempting idea, isn't it? This concept of the detached scholar, just observing texts from a pristine, sterile vacuum. Well, I'm going to shatter that myth right now. In the humanities and social sciences, there is simply no such thing as a view from nowhere. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll cover the myth of neutrality. 2, defining positionality. 3, theoretical roots. 4, practical methods. And finally, number 5, challenges and ethics. All right, section 1, the myth of neutrality, shattering the illusion. It is time to completely shatter the illusion of the invisible, omniscient author. Because the very first and most crucial lesson of your postgraduate career is this: the researcher is never detached. You bring your whole self to the archive, right? To the library and to the keyboard. And this brings us to a massive defining term for us: reflexivity. Our source material defines this as a process of critical self-awareness, introspection, and active reflection on your own influence on your research process. Now, here's the kicker. Reflexivity is not about eliminating your bias. Complete neutrality? That's basically impossible. Instead, it's about transparently acknowledging and managing that bias. By making these hidden influences explicit, you are actually supercharging the rigor and trustworthiness of your scholarship. Moving right along to section 2, defining positionality, holding up the mirror. So we really need to hold up a mirror here and define the specific, unique lens through which you, the researcher, view your work. This is the core of who is actually doing the researching. We call that lens your positionality. It refers to the confluence of all your various identities and background elements that collectively shape your completely unique vantage point. It underscores a pretty fundamental truth in academia. All knowledge is produced from a specific, embodied viewpoint. Recognizing your positionality directly challenges that old positivist myth of objective neutrality. You are not a blank slate. You are a complex, historically situated human being. So what exactly makes up this lens? Well, your positionality includes elements like your race, your nationality, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic class, age, and even your specific disciplinary training and personal values. To make this super concrete, just imagine two researchers analyzing a 19th century text on urban poverty. A researcher from a highly affluent background might focus entirely on the text's moral themes. But a researcher who grew up in working class poverty? They might read against the grain and spot subtle economic subtext and power dynamics that the first researcher just completely missed. Your background literally alters the very questions you even think to ask. And your personal lens, subtly but powerfully, influences every single stage of the research lifecycle. It starts right at the beginning with your topic choice, what you even find interesting enough to study in the first place. Then, it guides what specific evidence you deem relevant. When you hit a confusing or ambiguous passage in a text, your positionality heavily dictates how you resolve that ambiguity. And finally, it completely determines how you frame your final findings and the narrative you weave for your intended audience. Let's look at section 3, theoretical roots, the ancestors of transparency. The incredible standard of transparency we hold today didn't just drop out of the sky. It's a legacy of some really hard-fought intellectual battles. We owe a massive debt to the scholars who historically demanded we acknowledge who is producing the knowledge. You can see this evolution clearly when we compare the totally outdated positivist claim of absolute objectivity, that idea of a value-free pathway to a universal truth, against our modern understanding of situated knowledge. Reflexivity fundamentally posits that knowledge is actively constructed through the interplay of you, your methods, and the subject matter. It isn't just sitting there waiting to be discovered. Real validation comes from transparency, not from some impossible detachment. And the pioneers of this approach came straight from critical social justice movements. Feminist scholarship rigorously challenged traditional, male-centric knowledge, demanding transparency about the researcher's gaze and situating women's experiences historically, rather than making huge universalizing claims. Post-colonial studies, they decolonize knowledge by forcing researchers to examine their imperial gaze and inherent Eurocentric biases. And queer theory completely disrupted heteronormative assumptions by exposing the normative gaze, Collectively, these disciplines demanded transparency, proving once and for all that acknowledging your positionality is a massive intellectual strength, not a weakness. All right, Section 4, Practical. First up, maintaining a reflexive journal or memo. As you're researching, physically write down your thoughts, your evolving biases, how your feelings about the text are shifting. Get it on paper. Second, engage in peer debriefing. Regularly discuss your interpretations with trusted colleagues who can gently point out your blind spots. Third, publish explicit researcher statements in your final papers that clearly outline your positionality. And finally, maintain meticulous auditing trails and provide thick descriptions of your methodology. Show the exact choices you made and the rationale behind them so anyone else can clearly follow your interpretive journey. Section 5, Navigating Challenges and Ethics, the Guardrails of Scholarship. As your mentor through this process, I have to give you some firm but hopefully encouraging warnings about the common pitfalls new postgraduates face here. Here's a huge one. Beware the trap of self-indulgent navel-gazing. Our sources explicitly caution that if you aren't careful, the focus shifts entirely onto you rather than the actual text or subject you're supposedly studying. You've got to avoid analytical paralysis. The trick here is balancing deep, inward reflection with steady, outward analytical progress. Remember, you are a lens focusing the light on your subject. You are not the subject itself. And beyond methodology, this really comes down to profound ethical accountability. You absolutely must be transparent about your biases to avoid just imposing your own worldview onto a text, especially when you're interpreting marginalized experiences. Listen, if we aren't incredibly careful with our positionality and the power dynamics at play, we run the very real danger of inadvertently elevating dominant structures, or worse, further silencing marginalized voices through misrepresentation. Truly ethical research always aims for reciprocal and equitable relationships. I wanted to conclude this lesson with this incredibly vital quote. Reflexivity is not a static concept, but a continuous and evolving process. Let that sink in. It's not a one-time checklist you fill out on day one of your thesis and then just toss in a drawer. It is an ongoing, deeply embedded component of your lifelong intellectual and ethical development as a scholar. So I'm going to leave you with this lingering, provocative question to spark your self-reflection as you kick off your thesis projects. How will your own positionality shape the knowledge you are about to produce? I really want you to think deeply about what you are bringing to the archive. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and I absolutely cannot wait to see the rigorous, transparent, and ethically grounded scholarship that you're all going to create.